One that I've always come back to, because this actually happened to me about 10 years ago. I was late for class one morning, lived in a tiny little apartment with my roommate, nothing fancy, 100-year-old water system, most likely. And as I was turning the shower on, it was middle of January, so it was cold outside. I remember getting so frustrated because it would not heat up for about 30 to 40 seconds. I remember shaking my fist and being angry and thinking, I am late. What is the deal with this? Where's my instant hot water? I I just can't deal with this. I remember this moment where I had an epiphany and started to realize this idea that how many around the world have no running water at all right now? How many around the world would love if their biggest problem was that they had to wait 30 seconds for a hot shower that they can simply have by turning a knob and by pulling a lever? And here I am complaining that I had to wait 30 seconds for it. They're going to be slightly late for my class, which, by the way, I can get in my motorized vehicle and drive to. So that's one that's always been close to my heart and has helped me to appreciate the blessing of running water to the point where every time I get in the shower now, I pray and I thank God. I say, hey, thank you for this. Thank you for the ability that I can turn this lever and have warmth. Unless my wife is just taking a 40-minute bath, which she does sometimes, and then I hop in and have to bemoan her for that fact. No, I'm kidding. I love you, dear. But that aside, so I don't know if you guys have a first world problem or a situation similar to this that comes to mind right now.
Well, I actually think, it's great to be thankful. It's great to be, fortunate. We are fortunate in many ways, but there are some things that our ancestors had that we don't have, and I think we should acknowledge that as well.
Such as?
Well, I mean, we always, not always, but there are some people that think about, the bougie people, so to speak, can afford these free range, fancy foods, organic, all this other stuff. Our ancestors only ate that stuff. That was all they had. So, I mean, the so-called privileged food nowadays is stuff that our ancestors just had in abundance. That was all that there was. And they had more of a sense of community, I think, than we do now. So I think there are certain things that we should kind of see if we can fix them, because there are legitimate problems, even in a first world, I just think that for all the things we have, there are some things that we don't have.
Yeah. Well, and that begs the question of what is the good we should aspire to. It presupposes that, so there's the default that, oh, we have it better. We are closer to the ideal of human living than we were 1,000 years ago. But that presupposes that there is an ideal of human living. And what is that? What is your standard? To your point, it could be possible that the ideal of human living was actually better achieved in simpler societies.
I do think from a health standpoint, there's something to be said about eating something that's less processed. And for a long period of history, the aristocracy and the upper class were eating more processed food because it was more expensive and it was opulent, it was showing off to your friends. And now we see that kind of turning. It's flipping over. We're eating the healthiest food, and not most people, but a significant proportion of people, even living in first world countries, live in things called food deserts, where all they can have access to is mostly processed food, which is highly inflammatory and not healthy for your body.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so to your point, the most opulent among us are often the healthiest at this point, because they have access to the healthiest food, because that model of food gathering isn't scalable to where we live now. And we're trying out new models all the time, and that's what the hope is in those sectors.
It's also the fact that the government heavily subsidizes corn and other
Certainly.
things that lead to
Filler materials.
Oh yeah, I mean, a lot of corn syrup and other stuff like that. Yeah, there's I would like to readjust how food is, and I think there's it is interesting to watch if you've ever shopped at Walmart to see how Walmart has slowly changed. Like, they are getting into that, but you still have that baseline.
Here's calories.
Well,
It will
yeah,
give you
there's
calories,
also just
eat
people
that,
too who are like, I like white bread and that's all I like.
Yeah.
And there's all sorts of things in that. But I do agree. I think that the kind of food you eat is really, really important.
And cow's milk is heavily subsidized by the government as well, and it's not as healthy as we thought it was.
No.
Especially not the commercial grade stuff.
No. Whole raw milk. Well, you look, we're the only mammals that consume milk past
In Oregon,
infancy.
it's illegal to get raw milk unless it's under a certain amount. We used to try to do it, but it was.
I know some
drive-
people
we
who
had to-
break the
we-
law.
We had to drive so far to get
Yeah.
it from those people, and they could only produce so much a week that it was counterproductive. But
Well,
there's nothing like it.
yeah. I've worked with people from Feed Salem over the years and other food banks, and they'll talk about this fact multiple times. We don't have a lack of food; we have a lack of nutrition.
Yeah, for
There's
sure.
plenty of calories out there. There's plenty of just caloric intake, and that speaks to your point, Jake, that you see much higher levels of obesity and heart disease in low-income families, low-income individuals, and high-income. You think of it the other way around. You think you're high income, you stuff yourself with, thousands and thousands of calories day in and day out. But it's not the amount of calories; it's what is in those calories.
Yeah.
Cheap, crappy, unhealthy food is there in abundance and easy to find. So, and to your point, Richard, as well. So you could say, well, I like white bread. Well, I love white bread too, but you can also get white bread that is done in a more natural way. And
That's
not
actual bread, you mean?
It's actual bread, yes.
Yeah.
Would you rather have, natural organic white bread or processed wheat bread? There's the idea of healthy, and then there's actually the thing itself. And it's amazing how some industries have done a really good job of selling you on the health of something versus how good is it actually for your body. And this gets to our idea that we talked about earlier, that information is constantly changing, and now with the age of social media and technology, everybody has a voice. I mean, how many different fad diets or eating trends can one person posting from their parents' basement say, this is the real truth of how you should eat and what you should believe, and how many fad diets we had over the years? Remember back when eggs were evil, and now are eggs okay again? Are they evil?
They are.
again?
They're good
no,
again.
They've gone
they're
back
good
to being
again. They're
okay.
good again. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, that's true, and people can say crazy things, but we can also find the truth. Like these scientists who are
Yeah.
talking about like low carbohydrate diets, those people were able to get their messages out through the internet as well.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Yeah.
And that's one that's stuck.
Yeah. And
I think
and-
there's.
Please no, continue.
Okay. Also think that our understanding of ketones, like I'm on the ketogenic diet. I haven't been doing it very well the last couple weeks, but I
should have brought my creme brulee donuts in for you today.
Our
It's just
understanding of how
walked in front of your
ketones
nose.
work is only 100 years old, and it was they used to think it was a starvation issue, and so the science about that has come a long way. So our understanding of intermittent fasting and the benefits of intermittent fasting, and how probably people 100, 200 years ago were automatically intermittent fasting,
Yeah.
and that it's not
By necessity.
by necessity, and it's actually not bad for you, because there's this whole state of autophagy that you go through, which actually kills off all your dead cells, gets rid of them, recycles them, it regenerates your NK killers. It does all sorts of awesome things.
A lot of natural antioxidants.
Exactly,
All are produced. Glutathione,
resets
a
your
big one.
system, controls your insulin levels, does all sorts of really cool things.
See, and I grew up largely being told the opposite. When you fast, your body goes into starvation mode, so you store
and
more
that's,
food.
And unfortunately,
Yeah.
the last 20 years, a lot of the research has
Which if
been
you do for days and
undoing
days
that.
could be, yeah.
And one of the key things like that I learned is that they looked at a lot of the people in Germany and other places, and when they were starving, and they took blood samples, and they found huge levels of ketones. So I thought ketones were bad. And in excess, like if you're diabetic and stuff, it can be. It
Yeah.
can lead to ketoacidosis. But the point is that our understanding of what ketones do and how the body functions is actually being redefined right now. Like the current science is redefining that. And so our understanding is growing. Is keto diet perfect for everyone? No, because I don't think there is a perfect diet for everyone. I think you try things, and if they work for you, then you kind of stick with it. There are some people who respond much better to being a vegan than other people do. And for some people, it's like the greatest thing ever. Their body responds to it. It's like, and so I think there's not one perfect diet for everyone. But anyway.
I mean, there's also like, how are you being vegan? Are you just eating a bunch of like random junk
Oreos.
food,
Exactly.
or are you
Oreos?
eating?
I know. I was
So vegan.
If you're eating
terrified
vegetables, you're good.
when I heard Oreos were vegan.
Yeah. Oreos
Oh
are
my
so
goodness!
vegan.
My ex from many a moon ago was vegan, and we went to the store in time. She was picking up Oreos. I'm like, you can't have those. She's like, yes, I can. My mind was blown.
Yeah.
Oh, lordy lord. Well, this idea, actually, we're on a rabbit trail of nutrition, but that does translate into our cliche of the
Our
day
cliche, yeah.
that Jacob has volunteered to us. So maybe I'll tee this up and you can knock it down. We've all
All
heard
right.
the term garbage in, garbage out. It has many different applications. Maybe you want to unpack that just a little bit here.
Simply, right, you put garbage fuel in your body, eating highly processed food or, just copious amounts of sugar, alcohol, anything, just copious amounts of this that maybe it makes you feel good for like 10 minutes, but then you just feel like garbage afterwards. Or we know from scientific studies that these things cause damage.
Yeah.
The long and short of it is you put good fuel in your body and you get good results. You start to feel better. And in the same way, I think to kind of wrap it up even more, when we talk about technology and communication, those thoughts that we have, those ideas we engage with, those books we read, the shows that we enjoy, the social media posts that we spend a little too much time looking at, all of those things can be garbage and they can make you feel worse. So
Absolutely.
if you change your diet when it comes to information or nutrition, if it's good fuel, it can be smooth runnings. You'll have a high performance life, high performance outcomes, and remembering that cliche can be useful when we think to ourselves, like, oh man, I'm here and I'm feeling really bad on Facebook, and man, Stacy looks really cool today. I wish I was cool. Maybe you just think to yourself, maybe looking at Stacy this way is kind of garbage for me. And
Absolutely.
it makes me have garbage thoughts that contributes to the negativity in my life. And going out and maybe I don't know how to do it on social media. I don't spend too much time there. I do look at it occasionally. I'm kind of I think they call it lurker. I just kind of like look at stuff. I don't really comment too
Jake's
much.
just looking at
necessary.
Stacey
Yeah.
with jealousy.
Yeah, I follow a lot of researchers who talk about food. Oddly enough, so I love the vegan, carnivore, keto, low carb, high carb, all of that conversation. I'm knee deep in the stuff. I love it. But that being said, you have to listen to your body, and I like, in the spirit of the Agora, I like going back to Socrates. Know thyself. Right.
Socrates, I believe it is.
Socrates.
My buddies Bill and Ted
Indeed.
informed me that
Oh, yeah.
I'm mispronouncing it all these
Yeah,
years.
it's an excellent adventure.
There's the new one coming out this year.
Really? No
yeah.
way.
Bill and Ted Face the
Wow.
Music. Yeah.
Oh, I
So
can't even imagine.
I am terrified, but excited. At the I'm sure it's going to be
They're
horrific.
gonna have mullets though, right?
Oh, I hope
Like
so.
they can't come back and not have mullets. That's
I
just
can't
55-year-old Keanu Reeves with a mullet.
Right? What was it? Who's the actor? Bill S. Preston Esquire. What's the actor's
Alex
name?
Winter.
Does he? I haven't seen him work in years.
No, that's kind of the running gag. It's
Yeah.
like one went like this. He didn't really like flame out. He just never really did a whole lot. He's done a few shows, but no, it certainly not to the degree.
I always like
that-
to think that the people in Hollywood that jump in and jump out and you barely see them. I always like to think they're really smart with their money. I always like to think really good things of them. Like Keanu, like he just lived, hot and heavy, just like plowing through it, and so he had to get the next job. He had to work really, really hard to keep his lifestyle going. I don't know. He could have been
I made
just as
enough through
reasonable
Bill
as
and
anybody
Ted.
else. Yeah, but like the people who like come in and out and they look like they have quote unquote sad careers or something. I like to think they got their money and they got out. Good for them.
Maybe they're like an accountant on the side or something.
Say again.
It's an optimistic
They
perspective.
might be like an accountant on the side or something.
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
Well, we'll give you a full review of Bill and Ted in the fall after we see it.
Oh, excellent. Yeah.
But anyway, back to
Yeah.
your idea of Socrates.
Knowing thyself, listening to your body, and Richard, ketosis. In my mind, I've done ketosis for extended periods of time. I've done vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian. I've done intermittent fasting, time restricted feeding. I've been carnivore. I've fasted for 5 days before, and it's all good information. To act within your bounds of safety, right? You know what your body can do, and then you slowly start to find all those edges within yourself, right? How does my body feel when I'm in a ketonic state for an extended period of time? How long before keeping steady do I start to encounter problems? So at that time, it might be good to refeed with some carbohydrates. If it's 1 week, start there. If it's a month, start there, get to that place, maybe. And depending on all these different metabolic effects, they happen in your body at different rates. And so it all takes time. It takes a lot of patience and reflection. You can't get too hard on yourself. I see a lot of people just berating themselves and others. There's all of the puritanical nonsense that comes out of people who it's veganism or die, it's carnivore or die. And these cycles are so important for the human body.
It is.
Yeah.
No,
I'll tell you what I
think-
like to do in a minute, but go ahead.
No, it's fine. I think one of the things, like relating it back to how technology is, humans are very tribal in how they think, and humans are very tribal in how they think.
Yes.
Let's do that. And so it's really interesting that, when you get a tribe of people who are on, keto, or I was vegan for a while, and certainly everybody else is not okay unless they're vegan. That was sort of the message. And one of the things I've tried to move away from is allowing the pure think, I guess, I don't know what the word is
Dogma.
for it. Dogma, sure.
Yeah.
Of like, this is the only way to eat. No, it is a way to eat.
Yeah.
And there can be great health benefits from some of them. I don't think I did as well on veganism. I was really miserable, and I've done much better on ketosis. Like, low carb doesn't really do anything for me, but ketosis, fat emphasis, has been really, really good. So part of the whole thing of like garbage in, garbage out is, how do you allow people to think for you? And I think that's one of the keys, is like, technology sometimes does the thinking for you, where you just assume the position of the person telling you what to think, and so then you assume what you think the other people are saying.
So time,
Well,
time.
hold on, let them keep
Yeah,
going.
go ahead.
So,
And then
like,
we'll talk about it.
when I think about food in the most optimal sense, so our food is a signal to our body about what's going on in our environment. And if we think about our ancestors, right, they would only have food at certain times of year. There were festivals around, harvests and different kinds of harvest. And this is when we go hunting. It's when we all have a lot of meat. So we eat a lot of meat for a few weeks, and then we go back to how things are, quote unquote, regular. But in an optimal world, we would all be able to eat clean, nutritional food from our local environment, because that local environment, where you actually spend time, is sending a signal to all the plants, from the sun, from the different weather systems. All of those signals create and compound a relationship with the local environment that we need to tap into. Insofar as we spend time inside under artificial things, this is processed lighting. This is not the sun. This is processed air we're all breathing. It's filtered. We're taking things out. There's whatever chemicals from the building coming into this space. This is all sending signals to our body that our body doesn't understand. Our body wasn't created to feel these things this way. It changes. We all have felt differently walking into a beautiful building than we are when we walk into beautiful nature. Both equally awe-inspiring, but they're there for different purposes. And to live in relationship with your environment, I think, is the best way to move forward. So what that looks like is, in your local area, what is capable of growing and has been grown there should be what you try to get an increased percentage of your diet
Like a
from.
massive amount of Marion berries.
I mean, for serious, yeah. Like, in the fall, I just hound those berries. I'm serious.
Literally
Yeah.
named after our county. Literally, yeah.
Yeah.
So tying this back to kind of the big picture idea of what we put in, what we take in, whether the physical or the non-physical, and more often the non-physical.
Indeed.
Even,
We're very cerebral these days.
Exactly. Affects what goes out of us. Affects what comes out of us, both physical and non-physical.
So I just have a question. Have you taken a media fast? Have you ever done that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I one time went off of Facebook, and I hardly use Facebook at all, because I people use it for political reasons and stuff like that, and whether I agree with it or disagree with it, it's not really the issue. It's that the stress of that actually it impacts me, and so like I remember it physically impacts me. I remember I did a 3-month fast from Facebook, and I felt awesome.
Yeah.
I felt great. It's like I could just interact with people as people, right? And that it seemed like when I was constantly involved, it's like there's all these filters that I was starting to develop myself. And I think that is getting closer to some of that garbage that you were talking about, which is we have to be careful because the people do the thinking for us.
Yeah.
And I'm as susceptible as anyone else to that. It's not like I'm above that. But like I just noticed it. And so that's why last week I noticed, I was like, I got to take a break, because there's just so much going on. There's so much. And it's not to be the charge that someone might give is, oh, well, you just want to be ignorant. No, it's that there is an overload, and there is a sense in which social media, I don't know that it's always positive. I don't know that it puts things in a way where we can have rational discussion. Sometimes it's like, well, here's my conclusion, and you must agree with it. And it's like, well, that's That's not necessarily always helpful for understanding, for having empathy, those type of things. They don't create those feelings in you. That it creates a sense of garbage. Like, so if you put that kind of garbage, or if somebody's really energized and like, hey, like that can affect you. And I think you begin to take that on.
I think Kaya has something to add.
Yeah, so I participate in a lot of social media, and I feel like Facebook feels uniquely negative to me. Something is like very addictive and very negative about it, and I'm not sure whether it's like the fact that it's so curated to be like viscerally targeting your personal beliefs, because they do curate the stuff that you see.
What you want on your feed.
Yeah, like they choose it for you too.
Yeah, the algorithm.
It's really weird, and like something about it just feels wrong, and just getting rid of Facebook makes me feel so much better, like without getting rid of anything else. And I think that's something very strange that we should probably note.
It's a difficult problem. I follow a lot of the techno elite who are struggling with these problems, because it's not something that they do by design. They try to build a machine that gives the human being what they spend the most time interacting with. And we have a lot of negativity in us. Our brains remember negative things more than they do positive things, sadly. And so if they build a totally neutral machine to interact with us, we're going to end up in a negative space because of how the human brain kind of churns over ideas. And so that means they have to create a slightly biased system. And then everyone starts arguing, because how do you bias this machine? I will say, to Richard's point earlier about media fasting, the latest fad that I've been seeing among the techno elite and the nutritional elite is dopamine fasting. So they eliminate reward signals. So they try to keep things as like sedate as possible. I'm not too familiar with like what that looks like precisely. I do know that the techno elite, again, is separating their children from a lot of the platforms that they create and maintain in a big way. Like they just don't want their kids, playing Fortnite for endless hours, right? There's a relationship with screens that civilization is demanding of us. Because if we want to be able to communicate with our work and our career, we have to be able to use these things, but we have to learn to use them wisely now.
Well, yeah, and so Richard and Daniel and I work in campus ministry, and a while back, our former national director said something along the lines: if you guys don't have at least one form of social media, I may consider firing you, because you're working with college students, working with the young adults, and you're ignoring the primary, for good or for bad. They're saying it's a primary means by which so much is communicated and done. And it gets to that point where there is certainly a benefit, like event planning. It's great to be able to just say, here's all the details. I can share with who I want on Facebook. They can click if they're coming or not. It's much easier than calling people up, writing it down. There is certainly a blessing to that. So it's like, you don't want to throw the whole baby out with the bathwater, but at what point does the negative outweigh the positive? And that's what, on an individual basis, is sometimes, by the time people stop to think about that, they're so far deep in that they can't break that cycle. So
I think one of the, well, I mean, we're kind of getting well, let's just dive in. I think we should just dive into the question of the week. I think one of the things, and I think I think you're right in that our brains are programmed for danger, is how I would put it, but negativity. But like, you're gonna remember the thing that could hurt you versus the thing that you're like, oh, that was nice, that thing sticks out in your mind. And one of the ways that I think is really interesting is the comment section is so interesting, not because of what people don't say, but because of what they do say. Like, I don't know many people who would say the kinds of things that people say in the comment section to someone's actual face.
99% wouldn't.
And to me, like, one of the ways technology has impacted is it has removed the humanness of the person on the other end. And so, and everyone wants to point the finger and say, well, it's really these people doing it. I think it's all of us. Like, I think if you participate, you're going to naturally, it's just the byproduct of what it is. You're talking about a post. You're not talking about you can flame and call someone all the most horrid names in the world. And yet, even if I totally disagreed with you, I would never go to that place where I'm like, oh, I don't think it's productive and good.
But it's a lot easier to do when it's through a screen, when it's a collection of
But
random
yeah,
data,
but
when it's
here's
not a
but
human
and
being
here's
face to face.
here's the point.
Exactly.
Here's the place where I'm going with that. I'm trying to be honest. Is the tendency, even in myself, where I would never do that to you in person. The tendency that I know in myself is it feels really simple and like actually I'm not sure what the right word is. It feels right to type it in the section and be like, bam, there you go. Versus like
I made it different.
in real life, which I just I wouldn't talk to somebody like that, right? I would value the sense of this is a real person and they might have feelings and they have a backstory and there's something maybe I don't
Let's see what's
it
led into
removes
this
that
conclusion they have.
it removes
Yeah.
that and brings you to a place where the only thing that you think about, and this is where I wonder if social media isn't a mirror of ourselves. Does that make sense? Like how right we are, how etc. Versus when you get people like working in the talking,
Yeah.
you there's a little bit of like um, self-questioning you have to do. There's a little bit of give and take. It's not all or nothing. It's like, let's negotiate. Let's see, what do I really think is the most important versus what I won't. And kind of, so whether they meant to or not, and I don't think Twitter or Facebook went out to do this on purpose. I think it's just the natural byproduct of it. And I think it's something that I'm really hoping scientists pull out and extract in a meaningful way where we can understand kind of how to undo those things. But that's something I've noticed in my own life, is just how negative comment sections are, and the fact that you can just say things that you would never actually probably say to another human being. Now, some people might, I get that, but most people wouldn't.
The exception to the rule, certainly. Well, and this idea of coming to the table on social media doesn't really exist, because coming to the table says we're going to come as equals, we're each going to advocate our case, and we're going to try to meet somewhat in the middle. We're going to try to share this table for the common good. Social media says, I'm going to take the table and bash you over the head with it. This is my table now. Until there's no incentive to give anything, essentially. It's wholly take, because you're not dealing with an actual human being. And so often, we miss that point of, okay, do we actually want to consider that maybe not everything I've believed, everything I've come to view about this could be wrong? It doesn't invalidate every single thing I ever believe, because we also view it as, if I could be wrong on this, what else could I be wrong on? Well, you could be right on a lot of things as well. But you could say, hey, in light of new information that I was not aware of before, I am changing my viewpoint on X, Y, or Z. That's good. That's healthy. That's constructive. But again, there's not a lot of incentive to do that when you're not dealing with actual human beings. When you're dealing with this information on a screen versus saying, hey, this is a person, this is a human being who has come here to the table with concerns, and I want to validate that for whatever reason, even if it's an illogical reason, they are feeling it for a reason. So before I got married, my wife and I did premarital counseling, and one of the things our pastor told us that I remember to this day is, your wife is not looking for you to solve the problem right away. She is looking for you to just understand and acknowledge how she's feeling. Whether you think it's a rational reason or not, something has brought her to this point where she feels that way. And if you understand, okay, this is what brought you to this conclusion and this belief. Now you could say, I don't believe that's necessarily a valid belief because of XYZ, but I realize and I understand what has happened in your life has led you to believe this. And that really can only happen through personal dialogue. But that takes time and effort versus just sitting behind a screen and clicking, which is convenient and easy. I'm getting waved at right now by our wonderful producer. Sit, screen wave. Speaking of garbage in, garbage out, I'm going to go push some garbage out of my body right now. So, very tasteful. You guys continue this dialogue. I'll be right back.
Okay, so there was the thought of like of the other person on the other side of the screen on the internet not being a person in some sense, like they're distant from you. I think that it's wise to remember that they are a person for your own personal benefit, just because everything that you say on the internet time, and it can be a record of you saying something insane to a person say in real life. And so it's you don't want that brought up, someone bringing up like an old post that you made 10 years ago saying like, did you threaten this woman's life? Did you say you were going to like follow her home or whatever, even though you were clearly joking? It doesn't sound funny when, your boss is bringing it up to you in a serious setting. So I
Not
think
sure
that's
my
just.
mic is working anymore. I can't hear myself. Sorry. Oh, there. Oh, you are? Oh, pardon me. I'm sorry, Kai.
I think that's all I had to say
All
about that. Really.
right.
Well, there's a sense in which, um, there's these media companies now that are actually like looking in, like, so for job screenings, they actually go through and look at your social media and everything like that. And there's a part of me that is the balance here is how has technology impacted our ability to relate and understand each other. So I kind of want to stick with that. One of the things that I think is interesting or thought provoking is that is my life my own, or the time I spend online, if that's personal, is it really? Is it really personal, or is it for everyone to see? And I think there's I remember when the Patriot Act was done, and everybody was like, "Oh my gosh, the government, just gave itself the right to spy on you." Um, and, and the key there is there's the same sense and same opportunity that happens online, and yet we willingly participate to some extent. And so to me, I think one of the things there is, if you're in the backyard with some friends, there's an ability to feel like you can say or explore ideas that you otherwise may not say or do because of that thing that you just talked about, which is that somebody can find it. And that's one of the scary things, is that you don't allow people to progress in the world. Somebody might have a really bad view of something early on in life. And they grow up, they get some experience, etc., and then their views change, or they're more tempered or something. And so then they would be forever labeled based on that one thing that was technically. You see what I'm saying? And so how does that? Is that technology? It encapsulates everything as though that's the thing for all time, versus, oh, this person is growing and thinking and changing. I'm sure you've grown and changed. I'm sure you've grown and changed. I've grown and changed since I was younger. I have different views. And so technology almost doesn't allow us to do that. It makes us have to say, like, this is my, one of the things I always tell people is I reserve the right to be wrong, and I reserve the right to change my mind. And you can see, if you follow anything political, people use that as like a battering ram against you. But well, yeah, but maybe it's because you now see something better, or you have a different perspective, or something got moved. And so, to me, that's one of those hard, difficult things to understand is, is private life really private, or is it now on display for everybody? And I think that's a question that even the media giants need to answer, which is that stuff yours? Because you're the one who created it. I think technically it's theirs.
I think that we should encrypt a lot of these things and take ownership of our data personally. Yeah, I think that it is us, and I do think that humans abuse the information when they accuse each other blindly. If we come from this place of ignorance, we attack someone with ignorance. But if we show that we're humble before the information that we have in front of us and the person we're trying to deal with, then we can instead say, do you remember this? Do you remember saying this? What was going through your mind here? Does it still apply to you? Because these are the concerns I have as an employer, say, that you'll still act disconcertingly around, object X. I want you to be safe around object X, because I care about that.
Well, and we arbitrarily draw the line at what is, they say that there's things that are just so egregious, there's no context for it. And it's interesting that, and there are some things that you could say, if you made that statement at some point in good conscience and in your right state of mind, it is certainly disturbing. But context always does matter. Now, you may look at the context and decide it's still not appropriate. I still think that if you had this viewpoint, or especially if you still have this viewpoint that is so disturbing, given the nature of your work, it could possibly disqualify you from your ability to perform said work. But you're right. We don't want to accept the fact that people can change, that situations can dictate, how we act and how we respond. Although on the other side, I've heard also in premarital accounts, like saw a great illustration where a guy held a water bottle up and he shook it and he said, "Okay, why did water come out of this bottle?" I don't know if you guys have heard something similar to this before. And this reason is simple. He says because water was inside. It's like if something comes out of you, it's because that was inside of you. So there is an element of if that came out, it's the idea that people will say, "Oh well, I was drunk, so you should hold me responsible for what I say." In reality, you can say, "No, that's probably actually more truthful. You were unfiltered. That was what was inside of you anyway. You just didn't have the self-filter to recognize by saying this in public it might cause me harm, so I'm going to censor myself."
Then how do you explain people who lie like crazy when they're drunk? Like they just tell people outrageous lies just to see if they
Oh, really?
will believe it. Yeah, there's
See,
a ton
I
of
see
people.
the opposite, where it's just a confessing. Well, you have your different categories. There's your confessing drunk. There's your dialing drunk. Yeah.
Showboating drunk. They're like, yeah, I'm a newly graduated lawyer or something, and they're not a lawyer. They've never been to college. You know,
Interesting.
just like saying crazy things to see who believes it.
Well, maybe they're sociopathic and they've told themselves that so much in their subconscious that they actually believe it. Because I've seen the opposite of people who are highly intoxicated, that you actually get just raw, brute confession.
Morals. I think what you mean is like what do they call it? Pathological
Somebody
liar.
who convinced himself this is somebody who's convinced himself in their mind this is the truth. I am a lawyer to enough where they believe it. That doesn't register it. They're lying.
So I have a question.
I want to keep us kind of going down this. Do you guys think that more or less political problems, world problems, would be solved if we could get people to sit down and talk with each other in person?
That's a tough one. Gut reaction is yes, absolutely.
Isn't that what ambassadors are for?
That is, in fact, what they're supposed to be doing, and I think it's really hard to represent the collective emotional, rational state of large quantities of human beings, because we do trust other people to make decisions for us. I'm not on Capitol Hill here in Salem, petitioning for all of the things that I want and think should happen in the state of Oregon. But I trust that the duly elected representatives are caretaking this situation in a way that I find amenable enough not to go riot in the street, say. I'm still content enough with governance where I am, right, and current circumstances aside, where I'm at, everything is still okay as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
If there are 10 people in the nation, you could do that. Where literally
right. Yeah, it's just there's too many people with too many varied understandings of the world and the universe experience.
Well, and varied interests. You gotta recognize the interests of the farmer in rural Eastern Oregon are legitimate. They are credible, but they are far different than the person living in a high-rise in downtown Portland. So you were going to say something, Kaya. Sorry.
Well, I mean, I just understand why. Currently, there are some people rioting across, the United States, and a lot of people are getting fed up with the fact that the government doesn't appear to care about them. And I totally understand why they would think that, and I don't think that should be ignored. Yeah,
it's the idea of validating. Okay, what has led you to believe? Now you could say your actions are going too far. You still can't engage in the willful destruction of property, but at least saying, okay, what has caused you to come to this point of believing that there is no other alternative than physical violence, than the destruction of property in order to get your point across? And this speaks to the idea of mob mentality, which is a whole other thing we could do weeks and weeks on. Of how many in a mob are actually consciously thinking, I'm doing this in order to advance the cause of X, Y, Z, and it will produce this result, versus, yeah, break stuff, sweet, awesome, getting out of the house on a Friday night when the weather's good to have some fun. I just think it's interesting there's the old adage that persons are smart, people are dumb, that when you get a mob together, reason tends to fly out the window in the face of just this overwhelming group think. And that's the idea of dispersing a mob is for the point of, okay, when everybody scatters as individuals, they're less likely to engage in this irrational, destructive behavior. Even if their message, there's the idea of what they're trying to convey, and then there's the thing itself. And sometimes the idea is good, but the thing that actually comes out is not good.
I think that speaking to technology in the broadest of senses, some sort of artifice of something that we've created, right? Language can loosely be defined as a technology. I like to think of it in terms of psychotechnologies. It's a behavioral technology, something that we've trained ourselves to do to improve our circumstance as social animals to some extent. And so when we advocate for ourselves, we also find it difficult to get our entire point across. It's hard for one person to describe their inner workings well enough to satisfy their own needs. Oftentimes, even among people they are intimately related to, it's difficult for them to express these emotional states to satisfy themselves, let alone to satisfy others and the needs of the situation. And so we capitulate or we compromise internally for the hope and the sake of our relationships with each other. And so to expect a politician to be able to have thousands, if not millions of people supporting his endeavor, their endeavor as in a representative government, we have to understand that this is an impossible game that we're all playing, and we should try to approach it with care and understanding, because I don't think I understand anything except the fact that I know nothing.
Which is why I think the merit. There's a lot of merit to the state governments having more power idea, because I mean you just can't have this bland set of policies across an entire nation of so many different people with so many different values. It's just not possible.
I wonder what the local government is doing. I understand that the populace seems to have revolted, so local governance has failed. Regardless of what we think, governance has failed. A solution has to be found.
Or it could be that I would imagine that a lot of the police understand why people are upset, but they're also trying to keep the peace, and it's a precarious place to be, I think. One of the things that I think is interesting, and maybe you can get your guys' thoughts on it. It's a question I have, and I said this earlier, and let me unpack it just for a second. I feel like sometimes social media does thinking for us. Now, what do I mean by that? I'll be very specific here. The way that we understand data and a claim is the warrant, so how a regular argument works, not deductive reasoning, okay, not inductive reasoning. What we're talking about is what we call regular way arguments are made. We take a data set, and then we correlate it. That's the warrant. How strong is the relationship between the data set and the conclusion? And oftentimes, what I've thought about is technology has impacted us by doing the thinking for us. So what I mean is a meme, a conclusion is drawn. It's very forceful. It's very like this has to, something. It's just very powerful. And so you don't necessarily think through the assumptions in the warrant. You don't think through the way in which things are correlated. And so you just agree with the conclusion without actually having looked at anything else. And to me, that causes a problem. It could be that the thinking was done right, and it's a good conclusion. Yeah. But it removes the person's involvement in that process, which I know not everyone has the time for and everything. But one of the things I think is interesting is that technology, the more it removes us from that, the more it's just swaying. Just like you either have to agree or disagree versus, well, let me think about it. Does that make sense? And I think that's something that is different when you get people in a room together who can process and move through things and go, okay, well, I hadn't thought about that. That's a really good point you made. Or, I didn't see that other point over there. Or I don't quite think that justifies your conclusion here. And the more we rely on that, I actually think the more as a group, a society, we actually potentially tend to think less.
Well, I think memes, to your point, are particularly both powerful but also dangerous because we see a visual, and that visual speaks to us much more powerfully than raw data. So you, just trying to think of an example here right now. You see a visual of
beautiful Squidward.
Beautiful. Oh, yes, very beautiful Squidward. Okay, so you see a visual of a poor farmer in Iowa, and he says, because of this bill, my subsidies were cut, and now I can't pay my bills, and my farm's going under, and they're destitute. And you see them starving, you see their poor family, and that speaks to our emotions, and it leads us to a certain conclusion without the data behind that, where you could say, okay, this is why, unfortunately, we had to do this. Maybe there's simply no more money left, and budget cuts need to be made. There's because by doing that, we are able to, feed 50 times the people versus if we kept these farm subsidies, whatever it might be. And just the idea that we see a visual and it strikes a certain emotive response within us. And that's very powerful. But you look at the data or the reasoning behind what brought that visual into being, and it's actually much more complex sometimes than just what a visual image will portray in our conscience. So you're going to add that.
I think you guys have very little faith in people's reasoning ability. Because I've seen memes making fun of other memes, like in response to a meme that just doesn't make sense, I think there's a subreddit called The Right Can't Meme. It's basically just a bunch of people making memes out of existing memes that they don't like in response to the argument that they think is fallacious, basically.
Yeah. If somebody takes the time to go through that and point out the flaws in this meme and say, hey, this is why this information is incomplete. The picture is real, but understanding the context behind it gives a much greater perspective to why. But there's so much out there.
69% of millennials only read headlines. That's what the research, I read that 2 weeks ago. That's what the latest study shows. So
who reads the news?
Well, to me, that's if you only read the headlines, that's the problem. Is you're getting the conclusion without the thinking. How did they get there? What was the process? So I'm not trying to be. I do understand there are these groups out there who are trying to do that. I think the point is in relationship to technology is it removes the process of the thinking. Rather, what I would prefer, probably will never happen because, right, this is an ideal, Kai, but what I'd prefer is give me the information and show me how some people think about it. Like give me 2 or 3 different people who think about the information in different ways and let me decide what is that. To me, that empowers people to do the thinking themselves and to make sure that the thinking was done correctly. Because yes, memes can lead you to astray and counter memes, etc. My simple point is that technology, I think, removes the process of going through the warrant of how you connect data to conclusion, and it could be something as simple as if you take let's say if we argue some particular point and we use the specific rather than the general. So we use a specific instance to argue that this is true of everything, but it's not. Then social media then has drawn a conclusion that isn't necessarily accurate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, there's an old adage that cases make bad law, and along the same lines, it's generalities don't prove exceptions, exceptions prove generalities. And so there's a tendency to say that, yeah, because this happened in one circumstance, this happens in every circumstance similar. Versus, okay, this is an extreme, unusual scenario that almost never happens. So to make an entire policy or to shift an entire way of doing things around this very unique, very extreme circumstance probably isn't the best idea. Because 99.9% of cases, this doesn't happen. So but we live in such a reactionary society, and I think technology has only contributed to that in some degree because we could see the immediate negative effects of that. We hear about those extreme, almost unheard of circumstances much more often, where we say, okay, we need to throw the entire system out because of this one thing that happened. So from an economic perspective, I'll use the example of the Enron scandal in 2001. We're familiar with this. It's tragic. I mean, Richard, your grandparents, they lost all their life savings essentially in that? Something like that, yeah. A lot, yeah. So you have a very personal connection to that. And it's this tragic event that affected many, many lives. People lost their livelihood. It's this horrific example of the abuse of corporate America. But I would make the case to caution and say, okay, by saying that because there was an Enron, we need to completely destroy and remake the entire American financial system is overreactionary. You could say, look at how many successful businesses have gone on and grown and actually produced commerce and actually improved the quality of life for individuals and societies, not just in America, but the world around. You look at China finally recognizing private property. I don't remember exactly what year it was, but then you look at just how much their gross domestic product and quality of life has taken off. Now, I'm not condoning everything the Chinese government does, far from it, but you can argue there are people who are living, they got recognizing private property. That's an example. So the point is, we see one abuse of a system. We see one abuse of an idea, the free market, for example, and there's more than one, but we see that, and we say the entire thing is corrupt, the entire thing is bad, let's throw it all out and do something completely different. It reminds me of the old Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner cartoons where, like, Wile E. Coyote would have this perfect plan and everything's put in place and this one fluky thing would happen and he never went back to that plan. It's like, no, you had it. You were right there. If this one fluky thing didn't happen, you would have caught the Roadrunner. But yet you go to a completely different plan. No, do that plan again. Just fix that one little thing.
There's an interesting, I don't know what you guys think about this, but so in relationship to, doing the thinking for us, I've tried to do a little bit of thinking about this beforehand, so I'm trying to lead the conversation. You jump in at any time and you don't have to agree. One of the things that I find really interesting about social media is that it produces a sense of deep tribalism. And so this is one of the things I'm actually probably most concerned about. I do believe, Kaya, you made a really good point. There are people who can think rationally and are trying, right? Doesn't mean you always get it right, but they're trying. But the problem is that it's like, because it's about the conclusion, it's not about the thinking part, it's about the conclusion, and that's it. And you have to agree with the conclusion. It creates a sense of tribalism. I'm in or I'm out, whether I agree with the conclusion. Not, hey, I really like that point. Let me do some thinking about it. Let me participate. And there's this sense in which you either have to be in or you're out. And so it creates distinct tribal mentality. Like, I'm with that or I'm against it. Well, maybe I'm somewhere in between. Maybe I'm like exploring the ideas or I really think that's a valid point, but I don't know if it, do you see what I'm saying? And so that's one of the things I'm worried about in technology.
But regardless of memes, basically, I think people have always done that. I think people have always had that problem. I don't think memes are the problem. I don't think memes and cartoons are going to be the instrument of our society's destruction.
I think that the mistake that a lot of people seem to make, in my opinion, with social media is that they try to convey its utility as some sort of social, something to stand in place of real human interaction. Yeah. I've never seen it personally that way. It's always been a data aggregator. So it will, when I follow someone on Instagram, it's someone who shares ideas that I'm interested in learning more about. When I look on Facebook, I look only for people that I care about and how they're doing. And I think that the best way to think about social media and a lot of these applications is to find a way to communicate to the algorithm. And we have to recognize that everything we do on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter feeds into the algorithm. So like if you're scrolling really fast and then you stop all of a sudden and it's like a really pretty visual, probably a lot of blue in it, right? The data algorithm is going to say, show him more blue, pretty visuals. And then depending on the stuff that you subscribe to, there's a cluster of blue, pretty images that they will associate with that. And they're going to show you more of that. So just know that, right? So it's like, oh, I don't want to see that. So keep scrolling. You see somebody giving a bunch of like emotionally charged language, just keep scrolling. That's how you communicate to the algorithm, I don't want to see that. So those become less priority. So you can train your algorithm to feed you what you actually want, which is hopefully not garbage, right?
I do wonder if there's a sense in which whatever you followed, they just keep giving you the same kind of stuff. But let me.
You do, and that's why you have to be really subtle. And they give you tools, right? Liking and like hearting stuff, and then actually sharing. All of these have different weights. So the things that you actually want more people to know and understand, share that, right? If you actually like it, but you don't need people to like know you think that or whatever, just like it and keep going. You know, I think there's different ways to play with the algorithm, and different platforms have different interactive buttons.
So Kai, I wanted to make a comment on, I'm keep looking back at the question. I'm trying to stay focused on it like a razor, so because I know we can go off on rabbit holes. How has technology impacted our ability to relate and understand each other? I think one of the things, I don't know what you think about this, because I'm not trying to say as this is the only way to think about it, but there is a certain sense, and Jake, jump in on this as well. There's a certain sense in which I feel like 60 years ago, I've talked to a lot of older people who've been through the 60s. They've been through some really rough times, but they said the way that people kind of look at each other and talk about each other, it was in the extremes, like if you were in the news media or something, but the average person could be neighbor to neighbor. They could disagree on things and talk to each other. One of the differences I feel like is that, so if, let's say, Jake posts something preposterous and I go, oh, that's it, I got to unfriend him because I can't be friends with someone like that. That's what I mean by tribalism.
Versus if he was your neighbor and he said
versus,
something preposterous.
So if he was my neighbor, I wouldn't just be like, well, you're not my neighbor anymore. Like, I'm putting up a fence and we are never, and I feel like that mentality slowly is creeping in, even to neighborhoods where you see people like putting up their, sign in the front yard, and that's their statement of this is where it's like, no, wait, we're neighbors. We can talk. We can be friends. Like, I value the neighborly aspect way more than I do of like whether we have to agree on everything, because I think there's fundamental human value in people. And so my worry is, how has technology impacted our ability to relate and understand each other? It's that it's making us more tribal, and that tribalism is the filter by which we are now using to figure out, do I associate with you or do I not associate with you? And then through that, and this is where it'd be really interesting to see some sociological studies, there are key words that people in each tribal group have that they use to discern whether or not you're in or you're out. And so that's what I mean by removing the thinking part. Well, those key words may not be indicative of what that person actually thinks. They're just indicative of what you've labeled that person.
Well, in response to that, what Kaya is talking about is that these problems are not necessarily new. They're just illuminating. The technology is illuminating things that we have had going on against us for centuries. Like, we used to kill each other over land. We don't do that anymore. But we still have that tendency to maybe.
You have it, I want it, I'm going to take it.
Right,
I think
like neighbors don't kill each other. That's what I mean. But I think Kaya's saying that we're illuminating things that have kind of always been there.
By the way, can our audience hear you right now?
No.
Otherwise, probably not, yeah. So just ignore the dead air.
The luminous background.
So I do think that the internet has made us all less polite, because we have gotten into this habit of saying things that we would not say to someone's face, and we've started to bring that into real life in ways that we really should not. We're kind of disconnected from other people a little bit, so we are less polite. Yeah. But also, I think that there's something else that's going on here that we haven't really talked about at all, is that we're all living much closer together with much less space. In general, and I think that makes you feel kind of crowded in and a little bit kind of like territorial, and so you want someone... you want someone...
Let's see if COVID changes that.
Yeah,
I think it
I
will,
have a lot of hope.
personally.
Yeah.
I think COVID will change it for certain.
Yeah.
And then I think that, like, if you're living in super close quarters with other people, you want them to be like on your page, you want them to be part of your tribe, so you're going to get more kind of like antsy about that sort of thing, I think, just by default.
Yeah. Well, and Richard, to your point, the idea of your physical pre-internet, if you want to associate with human beings outside of your general family, you had to be neighborly to your neighbors. They were your closest physical people you saw. Now you don't know how to do that. You never had to see your neighbors, and you can have that human, I'm making air quotes right now for those listening on the podcast, human interaction through a screen, where you can just literally pick and choose and isolate. You're not bound by geography anymore.
Get rid of people at the drop of a hat. You don't have
Exactly.
to worry about making new friends. You can just find a new forum that has the people you're looking for, and that kind of is almost like cheating, you know?
It is. Like I grew up in a small town in Eastern Washington. I don't know where if you guys grew up in smaller or larger towns. We had one high school, one public school, one Christian school. So it's like the friends you were with there, they were the friends you had to put up with. Whether you liked them or not, you had to make some sort of effort because you're like, I'm going to be with these people all through grade school into high school. And when I moved to Vancouver at first, so it was a bigger city, not massive, but then in Portland, and I mean, I can only imagine what it's like in New York, or really really large metropolis. You have so many different friend circles. You're like, I don't like the people at my school, whatever. I have all these other millions of options of people I can choose to associate with. And again, technology has taken that and put it even on steroids. I don't like the people that I go to school with, or I don't like the people I work with. Who cares? I'm not going to make an effort to actually get to know them. I'm not going to make an effort to actually get to like them despite some of our differences because I don't have to. I can just click on a group. If I'm a video game fan, I can just associate with other video gamers through a screen. And again, the benefit of that is it allows you to find people who do have common interests as you, which is good. You could say, okay, I'm new in town. I like playing board games. Or is there a board game group or a board game community that meets here in town regularly? Yes, I can go check it out. But it eliminates the need to say, okay, I may not naturally make the biggest connection with this person who is my neighbor, but they're my neighbor, so it would benefit me to get
Right.
along with them.
No, and those are, yeah. My worry is, I think, like where I'm kind of going with this, the trajectory is where I'm worried it leads to is, I think there's some shared value in America, at least I hope there is, between people who are liberal and conservative. Sometimes they want to say that there isn't. I don't. In my experience, that it hasn't been true. They often state things in vastly different ways. But one of the things, like, think about it. Someone's on the side of the road. They got a flat tire. You pull over, and if the first question out of your mouth is, "Well, what political party? Whatever." Now I'm going to make a decision about whether I relate to you. That social media, oh man, some stories about that. But the question of now I make the decision about whether I will relate to you or not versus you're another human. And so I'm worried it creates a world that lacks empathy, that lacks the ability for people to actually be tolerant. And what I mean by that is to put up with people that actually wouldn't agree with you. And so does it bring about the kind of values that I want? Like, do you just never talk to anybody who you'd never disagree with, or you never do business with people? To me, that's not, well, first of all, it's not the world I want to live in. I don't think it's the world that the Good Samaritan, the story that Jesus told, was modeled after. His point was relate to the person you don't want to relate to and be kind to them, do good to them. Well, and so there's this, I'm worried that it creates such a tribal, that like let's say 20, 30 years from now. I don't think we're there yet, right? My worry is people get so enveloped in it, that it's the litmus test for whether or not someone is, whether we mean to or not. And there's a ton of psychology behind this and other things. If you want to look it up, for those who are listening, you can look up Alfred Said. He's the author of a scholar who termed The Other. And how do you dehumanize people? You make them another. And there's tons of ways you can do that. And so when we allow that to happen, sort of, and we don't think, we just follow the conclusion, then we become so tribal that I'm worried we'll become like tribes in other countries that are just like, well, you're not me, so that automatically means I have the right to do subset. And we all were like, oh, no, that won't happen. My worry is, left unchecked, that is always a possibility. Humans are absolutely capable of that. The Hutus, hunted down all the Tutsis and were like, you're not our tribe. And that's literally what they did. They looked at their ID card. Yep. So the tribal nature of human nature is really concerning to me, and I'm worried that social media is making people pick and choose sides rather than being like, you're a human being, and I may not agree with you. I'm going to associate with you just like I would my neighbor, just like I would someone else. At least I would want to personally. That doesn't mean I'm speaking for other people, but if my neighbor puts up a sign that I don't agree with, I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm not going to help you change your oil or mow your lawn or do something nice for you or watch your dogs. And so we become, maybe, and like you said this earlier, civilized, that's the word. Yeah. I'm worried we fall into this world where we're less civilized because all we're doing is paying attention to who's on what tribe's side. And so, and the reason I'm saying that is because of the question. How is it impacted? So that's my fear. I don't know that we're there yet. My fear is that it'll lead us there.
Well, we got a couple minutes left, so I'll make my final point, and then I'll allow you guys all to. Again, they can't hear you, oh wise Oz. Speak up.
I'm being super negative. I am sorry. Please love your neighbor if you're out there listening. That's what we want. We want you to like each other, engage with each other, be kind to one another, whether you agree or not. That's what we value. That's what I want. I shouldn't know if I should speak for everybody, but
Donnie Downer's spin on things here.
Tale. Maybe we'll do that next week. Oh, just leave it alone. It's a bad time for that.
I would just say that we have to do away with one of the conceptions we need to do away with in our society is that to acknowledge and to associate with somebody does not equate to condoning their worldview, condoning everything they believe. So you can say, oh, you talk to your neighbor who, believes in this, this, and this, so you believe in this, this, and this. No. And to your point of the parable of the Good Samaritan, one of the revolutionary ideas that Christ introduced, and whether you're a person of faith or not, I think you can agree he was the most influential person to ever live, and the fact that one of them, and one of the most transformational figures in human history, because the gospel message introduced this idea that everybody is my neighbor, and everybody is entitled to certain privileges and dignities because they're created in God's image. And not everyone is my brother. So there's that distinction that the Bible does make. There's certain covenant relationships you have with your brother, with your people, and certain obligations you have. There are obligations I have towards
strength and love your neighbors yourself. I don't know if I would follow that the brother distinction is
there. But the idea of there are different levels of covenant relationships. The idea of simply by somebody else being human, there are certain dignity to which they are entitled to, certain obligations you have towards them. I have greater obligations to my wife and to my children than I have to my neighbor. But I still have obligations to my neighbor, and I can't just say, well, they're the other. They are not in my tribe, so I can treat them as horrifically as they want because they have a different political affiliation, or they worship a different god, or they believed in different hobbies, so I have no obligation toward them because they're not just like me. Whereas I have an obligation to love them, to show them basic human dignity and decency, and validate their humanity. And by doing such, I'm not validating everything they hold to and everything they believe. So you can say, hey, I love this the way this person does so and so. I don't like everything about them. I don't agree with everything about them. Or with our political candidates, you can't even come out and say, hey, I like what, the president did regarding this. Because it'll be taken as, you are, you're a radical right wing or radical left wing, whoever's in office at the time. You can say, I'm not condoning everything he did. I say on this particular policy, I think it's good. I'm glad they did it. It's a good thing. But you're not allowed to because it's seen as a widespread acceptance of their entire worldview. And that's unfortunate versus saying, I appreciate this person doing this, or I appreciate this about this person. So,
I totally agree. As a person who doesn't really, I didn't vote for President Trump, but I have agreed with some of his decisions, and I have said that to some people that then thought immediately that I was on that side.
Exactly.
And I was like, that's ridiculous. You can't just assume things about people. You have to talk to them. And I think that's what this is all really about.
We've all lost a lot of nuance.
Yeah.
We don't think people are nuanced characters anymore. Yeah, right. Got to work on that. Well, be neighborly.
People. That's the thing with social media. Do you actually know someone?
Well, do you know thyself?
Exactly. and fine. I know that's my final point, but just on your point, there's so little incentive today's to bring it back to politics, to cross the aisle and actually say, you know what, I believe that on this policy, this other party is actually doing good, so I'm going to vote with them, because you're seen as a traitor to your people. And so if you are, exactly, and that's a whole other issue of why we should do away with it. But if you are a liberal who breaks with your pack and votes across party lines and says, hey, on this particular issue, I think this is good, and I am going to side with you on it, you're seen as, in many ways, as being a traitor. as going behind the back of your ideal, your tribe, and your constituents, if I could speak right, I'm making up words left and right today, will say, hey, thank you for crossing the line and voting for us on this one thing. We're still not going to vote for you because 98% of the time we don't like what you do. So we're still not going to vote for you in re-election, but thanks for this one. So there's not a lot of incentive to cross the aisle versus just digging your feet in and building your base and reinforcing, your own pack, so to say. And that's really unfortunate. And our wise learned producer mentioned that that's due in large part to the binary system of party politics, where it's about being loyal to the party versus being loyal to what you think is actually a good policy or a good idea.
So you're pushed to the conclusion rather than the thinking.
Yeah, exactly. So,
so let's just, I guess the goal is to continue to think about. So if you're listening and you're out there using social media, I mean, hopefully you'll think about some of these things as you move forward. And yes, that's right. Go to your room and think about what you've done. I've been guilty though of, everything I just said, I've been guilty of. And I think that's one of the key things is one of the difficulties sometimes, this is a whole nother subject, but we tend to think everyone else is the problem rather than, I'm just as susceptible to this as everyone else is. I'm just as susceptible to groupthink, to drawing the conclusion without thinking, to just being like, well, yeah, I agree with this, so I must be against those people. Well, that's not necessarily true. And, taking a step back, maybe go hug your neighbor who you're like, oh my gosh, that's such a horrible person, and you might discover you have a new friend. You may not agree on things, but you might have a good friend. And so, anyway, hopefully that gets to the question of how it's impacted our relationship. Certainly, we didn't answer it all, but hopefully we made some inroads. So
our goal in the Agora is never to actually come to any conclusions. We just want to circle back right where we started. So, Jacob, Kai, you guys, as our guests here, any final words or final thoughts or shout-outs to our giant listening audience out there?
Hi, Mom.
Yeah. Hi, Jacob's mom.
Hi, Jake.
Hey, Kai. No, I think it was very good. We circumambulated a lot of important stuff here and hopefully gave a lot of people some inroads to more positive thinking.
That's what we strive for. So again, if you guys have any thoughts, questions, if there's questions or ideas that you would like to hear discussed here, if you're interested in being a guest and joining, we don't claim to know everything. We don't claim to know a lot of things. We just, like I said, we're people who believe in the value of discussion, the value of face-to-face conversation, human interaction, and that there is a lot of good being done out there through dialogue, through real conversation, through those with whom you disagree and you may not see eye to eye on everything. So consider that possibility as you go about this week, especially as our world begins reopening somewhat. I might actually go out to lunch today for the first time in months. So it is weird to think about, yeah. We went to our favorite coffee shop just up the road at Broadway the other day, and it was probably 30 people between indoor and outdoor, and it was a good vibe.
Gotta be careful.
I know. I think people are dipping their toe in slowly, but it was good to do something normal again. So within reason, within caution, go out, do normal things, enjoy the sunshine. Yes.
Wash your hands. That's my message.
Exactly. On that note, thank you so much.